Hello, my name is Jack Fulmer, and I'm the Artful Narrator. I call this series Type1Writer, both because it is a silly play on words, and I'm fond of those, and also to remind me of something very powerful that one of my subscribers left in a comment, suggesting that I could weave a sort of narrative approach into these videos about diabetes. And at first I tried to spin this into some more grandiose concept with higher production, which defeated the purpose of making these more intimate and short videos. But then I realized that it could mean more than just the kind of storytelling that comes from sharing anecdotes, because there are also the kind of stories that we are told and the kind of stories that we tell ourselves, and the kind of stories that we tell ourselves, and which together shape our reality and what we perceive as the standard that we should hold ourselves to. And so I would like to share a story with you of such a hurdle that I had to overcome, and the beneficial revelation that it finally brought about. Now, when I was first diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, it was presented to me as a science, as something that is relatively, not entirely, but relatively exact in how it is managed. You have ratios for how many carbs you eat, what the insulin shots that you give is connected to those carb ratios. You have ratios for what sort of a correction you give for a high blood sugar or low blood sugar. And the understanding is that in knowing all these data points and combining them together, you should be able to, with care and appreciation for the gravity of this task, be able to have a good blood sugar range, and after a meal to be able to do a blood test and find that your number will be in a nice balanced 150-ish range. And yet I continually had great trouble hitting that bullseye, and frequently asked the doctors, what am I doing wrong? And unfortunately, the doctor that I had at the time basically didn't give me anything, just said, keep it at 150. Basically, it's not that hard. What are you doing wrong? And so this was the narrative that I found myself stuck in, believing, well, I must be doing something wrong because it does not appear that it's supposed to be this hard. I must be calculating the carbs wrong. I must be getting the ratios not quite right. When in fact I was doing just the opposite. I was focusing so much and spending so much energy and giving such attention and passion to making sure that I took this vital aspect of my life seriously. I did that to the extreme that I ended up doing very little else. And this is when I finally began to realize that managing type 1 diabetes isn't achieved through just science. There are two other facets that give you the full picture of how to better understand this, and I would like to share those with you now. The first of these is art. Now, art is something that blends excellently with science, and at least in the application, not necessarily always in the spirit. And what I'm talking about is, consider cooking. Now, cooking bears many strong similarities to science. There are recipe books with precise ingredients, temperatures at which the meal should be prepared, and instructions for how to present the finished product in a way that will delight the prospective diner. And yet, cooking is pretty much universally understood to be more of an art than it is a science. And the reason for that, in part, is all of the variables. The freshness of the produce or lack thereof, the difference between the elevation that you are preparing this meal and the elevation in which the recipe was originally written, causing variances in how long the meal will need to be cooked to reach its peak temperature, and moreover the manner of stove that the meal is cooked on, whether it is an electric stove, an induction stove, a gas stove. Each of these changes the consistency of the heat that it is put under and will put in more variables. Add to that the unique sense of taste and personal style that each chef brings to their own dishes, their own definitions of what they believe is the right amount of spice or the right amount of sweetness, and then finish it off with whatever unique dietary requirements or personal tastes the person who ordered the meal has, and which they are expecting to see in the finished product. And what you have is something that is vastly more than the sum of all its parts. It is not science. It is art, trying to juggle all these intangibles and create something beautiful from this chaos. And diabetes, type 1 diabetes, is much more akin to art in this regard, because there are so many variables that may or may not have an effect, and you have to decide which of these you should try to factor in and what other ones you might be all right to leave out simply because you cannot account for them all. Is the meal that you ate, the content of it, such that there are enough healthy fats that it will change the absorption of the carbs and cause the carbs to absorb into your system more slowly, so that the insulin shot that you gave to act upon those carbs and help those sugars to be released into the blood instead will find that the sugars have not entered the blood yet, they're still in the stomach, and it will instead drop your blood sugar and create a dangerous situation? Or will, though you've eaten this meal before with that same result, will that not happen this time? Will exercise you had earlier in the day, strenuous though it might have been, end up not actually having a significant impact on your meal later in the day? Whereas a previous day where you did relatively minor exercise, you found that it had a major impact and caused you to go low perhaps up to 6 hours after the exercise, simply because, minor though the exercise appeared, it was using muscles that you have not used in such a long time. And while your other muscles had been built up to the point where the exercise didn't impact them as savagely, this simple, different chore wreaked havoc with your blood sugar. These are all variables, and add on to that the fact that your mood, whether you have stress and different fight or flight chemicals and things like that coursing through your body, through ancient instincts of survival, all raising your blood sugars and causing extra troubles. Or are you feeling especially, lighthearted, and this causing different variations? It's all just too much to factor. And the best that you can do is get the best that you can do is get it right about half the time. And that brings us to the third part, and that's random chance, or a little bit of luck, shall we say. Now this is a silver dollar, Morgan silver dollar, over 100 years old. Very beautiful coin. Almost solid silver, has a wonderful weight to it. Now coins are commonly used to decide things. Seemingly a very good way. 50% chance that it'll land heads or tails. And while there's some question as to, is it actually 51% on one side and 49% on the other, regardless, the situation is still that you do not know with certainty what side will land face up. Here, for example, I will start with the head side on top, and you can call it in the air. Landed tails. So, were you right? Well, statistically, probably about half of you were. Now, if you were wrong, you likely do not blame yourself for this. Why, of course, I should have known that with the barometric pressure and all these different variables and the angle of the flip, naturally it would land on tails. Even a child would know that. No, of course not. You understand that this is chance. But I did not understand that there is such a strong element of random chance in type 1 diabetes. I believed that the result of a meal, my blood sugar being too high or too low, was directly caused by my actions and my inadequacies in calculating this, in getting the ratios perfect and all the little bits and bobs accounted for. When in reality, it is 1/3 random chance, 1/3 luck. You can't possibly account for all those variables. You can't possibly be sure what's going to have an effect this time and what isn't. And so what I have learned is that while I was taught how to manage the scientific side of diabetes, how to work with the medical aspects to try to have my body be in as best shape as possible, there's another very important factor, and that is emotional health. And giving yourself grace and understanding that diabetes is not something that is so simple. It has its days where you're able to seemingly get lucky and find yourself on a hot streak where all those blood tests are turning out just the right number and everything's going perfect. And then with a flip of the coin, suddenly it can land on tails when you called heads, and you find that that 150 blood sugar reading that you were shooting for has suddenly turned into 300, dangerously high, or 40, frighteningly low, for seemingly no reason, with honestly nothing that you can look back and try to learn from, no lessons that you can take from this. And yet, there is a valuable lesson that you should take to heart in these situations. And that's that while you can't do anything to increase your chances of being lucky the next time, you can give yourself the grace, the support, the understanding to realize that you're doing a dang good job. And that at the end of the day, that's all you can do. So give yourself the support to know that sometimes the flip of the coin is going to go against you, but that doesn't mean you're doing bad at managing your type 1 diabetes. And if you're someone that doesn't have type 1 diabetes, I hope that this was able to give you a small glimpse into understanding both how just ridiculous this is, but also how the sort of cultural perception of how easy type 1 diabetes is supposed to be can really be debilitating, to the extent that even some doctors, perhaps through some sort of misguided desire to not psych us out or worry us by making it seem too gargantuan, they instead present this situation where it appears that this is a minorly difficult ailment to manage, and so that by extension, any inadequacies, any troubles that we have must be our own fault rather than the inherent randomness of the disease. So we must use our skills as authors to realize that we have spun this story partially for ourselves, and it has partially been spun by other people, and that we must take the initiative to rewrite the story, at the very least, in the context of our own lives, and understand that it is not a story of someone screwing things up and getting things wrong, but someone doing the best they can and getting it right 50% of the time. And hey, that's still dang good. So thank you so much for watching. As always, I hope that in some way this video was gave you a sense of either being understood or a deeper understanding for these challenges, and fostered a sense that while I'm not a diabetes health expert or some sort of guru that has everything dialed in perfectly, that I've been through all these things just like you, and I can relate to what you're going through. As always, thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video. Knew I was going to drop it one of these times. Glad it was after the video was over.